Britain in the 1980s built cars for people who'd made their money and wanted everyone to know it. Bold engineering. Brave electronics. Reliability that couldn't keep up. Stick around for number 5, the most ambitious car of the decade, and the one its own ambition broke. New here. Subscribe. Bold, flawed cars, every week. This is the countdown. Number 10, Rolls-Royce Camargue, 1980. The most expensive car in the world, styled by committee, driven by very few. The Camargue continued production into the early 1980s from Rolls-Royce of Crewe, a two-door coupe styled by Pininfarina and built on the Silver Shadow platform. Its 6.75-liter V8 produced an unpublished but estimated 220 brake horsepower, mated to a GM-sourced 3-speed automatic transmission. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 120 miles per hour. It had actually gone into production back in 1975, but by the turn of the decade it was still the flagship of the range, still hand-built at a pace measured in weeks rather than days, and still priced at a level that made even other Rolls-Royce models look almost sensible by comparison. Fewer than 550 were built across the car's entire production run, which stretched to 1986, making it one of the rarest post-war Rolls-Royces despite being in the catalog for over a decade. The Camargue was, at launch, the most expensive car in the world, and its styling proved divisive from the day it appeared, a slab-sided design that aged awkwardly against sharper, more angular rivals emerging by 1980. Pininfarina had a reputation built on elegant, flowing Ferraris and Fiats, and the Camargue's heavier, more upright bodywork felt like a departure the studio itself never fully explained. Some owners loved the presence of it. Motoring journalists at the time were considerably less kind, and that reputation has followed the car ever since. The unexpected fact: the Camargue's air conditioning system was, for years, the most powerful fitted to any production car, engineered to cool the cabin from desert heat in under a minute. Rolls-Royce spent a fortune solving a problem almost none of its owners actually had. The system was originally developed with Middle Eastern buyers in mind, at a time when oil wealth was reshaping Rolls-Royce's customer base, and the engineering team treated it as seriously as they treated the engine itself. A car that mastered the climate and struggled to master its own reputation. It's worth pausing on just how much the Camargue cost when new. In the UK, it was priced at roughly double a standard Silver Shadow, and in some export markets it comfortably outpriced a Ferrari or a Lamborghini of the same era. Buyers weren't paying for outright speed. A 0 to 60 time in the region of 10 seconds was nothing special even by 1980 standards. They were paying for the badge, the build time, and the sheer scarcity of the thing. Today, surviving Camargues occupy an odd place in the collector market. Too divisive to command Silver Shadow money, too rare and too well-engineered to be dismissed outright. Number 9, Daimler 66 Series 3, 1980. A badge, a grille, and very little else that Jaguar hadn't already built. The 66 Series 3 launched in 1980 from Daimler, by then entirely absorbed into Jaguar, sharing its 5.3-liter V12 engine, body, and chassis almost completely with the Jaguar XJ12. The engine produced 299 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 147 miles per hour. The 66 offered a fluted grille, a different badge, and a slightly plusher interior over its Jaguar sibling, positioned for buyers who wanted Jaguar performance with old money branding attached. Daimler had once been the preferred mark of the British royal family, supplying state cars for decades, and that lingering prestige was really the entire product. British Leyland, and later Jaguar under John Egan's stewardship, understood that some customers would pay a premium simply to avoid the word Jaguar on the boot lid. The unexpected fact: by 1980, Daimler had not designed its own chassis in over a decade, meaning the mark that once built cars for the British royal household was, mechanically, indistinguishable from a showroom Jaguar with a different name on the boot. The last genuinely distinct Daimler engineering had effectively ended with the Majestic Major in the 1960s. Everything after that was rebadging, however tastefully done. The heritage was real. The engineering underneath it belonged to someone else. None of which stopped the 66 from selling reasonably well throughout the early 1980s. There was, and still is, a certain kind of British buyer who values discretion over distinction, and the Daimler badge offered exactly that. A way of owning what was mechanically a top-spec Jaguar without quite looking like you were showing off. Jaguar's own management understood this well enough to keep the Daimler range alive right through the Series 3 and into the later XJ40-based cars of the early 1990s, long after any pretense of separate engineering had disappeared. Number 8. TVR Tasmin 280i, 1980. Angular styling nobody asked for, wrapped around parts everybody recognized. The Tasmin 280i launched in 1980 from TVR of Blackpool, a wedge-shaped two-seater built on a steel backbone chassis with a fiberglass body, powered by a Ford Cologne 2.8-liter V6 producing 160 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 130 miles per hour. The Tasman's flat-paneled, origami-like styling was a deliberate break from TVR's Cavia past, aimed at a more upmarket, GT buyer audience than the company had previously courted. It was designed under Oliver Winterbottom, who had previously worked on the Lotus Elite, and the intention was to move TVR away from its image as a scrappy kit car cousin and toward something that could be cross-shopped against Porsche's 924. The name itself, Tasmin, was reportedly plucked almost at random rather than chosen for any particular resonance, which says something about how quickly the car came together. The unexpected fact: the interior switchgear, indicator stalks, and instrument binnacle were sourced largely from Ford's contemporary parts bin, meaning a car priced against Porsche shared its column stocks with a Cortina. This was not unusual for a low-volume manufacturer working on a shoestring budget. Even Aston Martin and Jensen leaned on mainstream parts bins at various points, but it stood out more starkly on a car whose exterior was trying so hard to look like nothing else on the road. Ambitious styling, familiar hardware. The gap between the two was where the criticism lived. Underneath the criticism, though, the Tasmin platform proved remarkably durable for TVR as a company. That backbone chassis and V6 pairing would go on to underpin the later 350i, 390 SE, and eventually the wide-bodied Griffith and Chimera of the 1990s, cars with a far better reputation than the Tasmin that started it all. In hindsight, the Tasmin looks less like a failure and more like an awkward first draft of a formula TVR would spend the next decade refining into something genuinely excellent. Number 7. Rover SD1 Vanden Plas EFI, 1982. Built with robots, finished by hand, undone somewhere in between. The SD1 Vanden Plas EFI launched in 1982 from British Leyland's Solihull plant, the range-topping version of the SD1 Executive Saloon, fitted with a fuel-injected 3.5-liter V8 producing 190 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 125 miles per hour. The SD1 had been styled with genuine ambition, its Ferrari Daytona-influenced fastback silhouette winning European Car of the Year in 1977, and the Vanden Plas trim added leather, walnut, and every luxury option British Leyland could offer. It was, on paper, a genuinely modern executive car, a 5-door hatchback layout years before that configuration became fashionable in the segment, with a driving position and dashboard that felt more like a jet cockpit than anything BMW or Mercedes were building at the time. The unexpected fact: the Solihull plant that built the SD1 was among the first in Britain to use robotic welding on a production line, yet the cars that emerged from it were plagued by panel gaps, electrical faults, and paint that failed to cure evenly. Problems the robots were installed specifically to prevent. Industrial disputes, inconsistent parts quality from third-party suppliers, and rushed changeovers between model years all compounded the issue, so that a car engineered with real ambition earned a reputation for breaking down that took years, and several facelifts, to even partially repair. The factory got smarter. The car, somehow, did not. There's a broader lesson in the SD1 story about British manufacturing in this period. Robotic welding, when it worked, produced panel accuracy well beyond what human welders could achieve consistently. The problem was never the robots themselves, it was everything around them. Parts arriving out of spec, quality control that hadn't been redesigned to match the new production line, and a workforce navigating one of the most strike-prone periods in British industrial history. The SD1 became a kind of case study, taught for years afterward, in how automating one part of a broken process doesn't automatically fix the process. Number 6. Jaguar XJS HE, 1981. A grand tourer that drank like an ocean liner and handled the fuel crisis accordingly. The XJS HE launched in 1981 from Jaguar at Browns Lane, a facelift version of the V12 Grand Tourer fitted with Michael May's Fireball high-efficiency cylinder head, lifting economy without sacrificing the 5.3-liter engine's 295 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 150 miles per hour. The HE update was a genuine engineering achievement, improving fuel economy by roughly 20% at a moment when Jaguar's V12 was under real threat from rising fuel prices and shrinking demand for large-capacity engines. It arrived at a pivotal moment for the company. The original XJS, launched in 1975, had sold so poorly through the late 1970s that its cancellation was seriously discussed within British Leland. The HE version, alongside a renewed marketing push under John Egan, is widely credited with keeping the model alive long enough to eventually become one of Jaguar's most enduring nameplates. The unexpected fact: despite the HE improvements, the XJS still struggled to clear 15 miles per gallon in ordinary use, meaning Jaguar's efficiency breakthrough produced a car that remained, by any everyday measure, one of the thirstiest Grand Tourers sold in Britain. The high-efficiency badge on the boot lid became something of a running joke among owners, who appreciated the improvement in principle while still budgeting for fuel stops that rivals from Germany simply didn't require as often. An engineering win that still felt like a defeat at the petrol pump. What the HE update did by Jaguar was time, and time turned out to be exactly what the XJS needed. By the mid-1980s, with fuel prices stabilizing and the worst of British Leland's troubles receding, the XJS found a genuine audience, particularly in the United States, where it became something of a status symbol away from the more common German options. It would stay in production, in various forms, until 1996, making it one of the longest-lived Jaguar model lines of the entire century. A remarkable outcome for a car that very nearly didn't survive its first 5 years. Number 5. Aston Martin Lagonda Series 2, 1980. Overengineered, under-delivered, and years ahead of the technology needed to make it work. The Lagonda Series 2 launched in 1980 from Aston Martin at Newport Pagnell, a 4-door luxury saloon powered by a 5.3-liter V8 producing 280 brake horsepower, distinguished above all by its all-digital instrument cluster and touch-sensitive switchgear. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 143 miles per hour. The Lagonda's cabin replaced conventional dials with cathode ray and LED digital displays years before such technology existed in any other production car, controlled through touch-sensitive panels rather than physical switches, a genuinely radical proposition for 1980. Aston Martin, at the time a small and financially fragile company, had essentially bet its future on this one car. The wedge-shaped exterior, designed by William Townes, was striking enough on its own, but it was the dashboard that dominated every review and every conversation about the car, for better and for worse. The unexpected fact: Aston Martin's digital dashboard was so far beyond available component reliability that early cars were delivered to customers with the electronics still non-functional, the instrument panel simply blank, while engineers continued development after the car had already been sold. Some early buyers reportedly waited months for a working dashboard after taking delivery of the car itself. The technology was eventually revised across several different display systems throughout the Series 2 and Series 3's production run, as Aston Martin tried, repeatedly, to catch up to the promise the car had made on its launch day. The future was on the dashboard. It just hadn't been invented yet. It's tempting, looking back, to treat the Lagonda purely as a cautionary tale, but that undersells just how influential its ambition turned out to be. Touch-sensitive controls, configurable digital displays, and screen-based driver information are now standard across the entire car industry. Aston Martin was simply trying to build all of it, at once, with early 1980s components that couldn't keep up with the vision. Production limped on in small numbers all the way to 1990, and the company reportedly lost money on nearly every single one it built, treating the Lagonda less as a profit center and more as a statement of intent for a struggling marque desperate to prove it could still innovate. Number 4. Reliant Scimitar SS1, 1984. A sports car aimed at a market that had already moved on to something German. The Scimitar SS1 launched in 1984 from Reliant of Tamworth, a small convertible sports car styled by Michelotti and initially fitted with a Ford 1.3-liter engine producing 69 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 100 miles per hour. The SS1 was meant to revive Reliant's sporting credentials after the successful GTE, but its styling, a high beltline with a stubby, upright nose, was widely criticized on launch, and the entry-level engine left it underpowered against contemporary rivals. Reliant had genuine sports car pedigree. The earlier Scimitar GTE had been popular enough that Princess and famously owned several. The SS1 was supposed to modernize that legacy for a new decade, aimed squarely at buyers cross-shopping the Mazda MX-5's eventual segment before that car even existed. Instead, it arrived into a market that increasingly wanted refinement Reliant's small factory simply couldn't match. The unexpected fact, a later Nissan turbocharged Scimitar SS1 variant, developed to address the power complaints, proved genuinely quick, but arrived too late to repair a reputation the underpowered original had already set. That turbocharged version, produced in tiny numbers, is now considered by enthusiasts to be a genuinely capable and underrated British sports car, one of those cases where the fix existed, but the market had already stopped paying attention. Reliant fixed the engine. Nobody was still listening by then. The SS1's timing looks especially unfortunate in hindsight. Mazda's MX-5 arrived just 5 years later, in 1989, offering sharper styling, better reliability, and Japanese build quality at a similar price point, and it went on to become the best-selling two-seat sports car in history. Reliant, by contrast, was a small independent manufacturer without the capital to iterate quickly or market aggressively, and the SS1, along with its later SST successor, never sold in the numbers the company needed to secure its long-term future. Number 3. Bentley Mulsanne Turbo, 1982. The most powerful Bentley in a generation, wrapped in suspension that hadn't caught up. The Mulsanne Turbo launched in 1982 from Bentley at Crewe, sharing its body with the Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit, but fitted with a turbocharged 6.75-liter V8, producing an unpublished output later estimated around 300 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 135 miles per hour. The Turbo was the car that began Bentley's separation from Rolls-Royce as a genuinely sporting marque again, its turbocharged engine delivering a level of performance nothing wearing the spirit of ecstasy had offered in decades. 4 years, Bentley had existed almost entirely in Rolls-Royce's shadow, selling a fraction of the volume and trading heavily on badge engineering. The Mulsanne Turbo changed that conversation almost overnight, giving Bentley a genuine identity again as the performance half of the shared parent company, a positioning that would define the brand for the rest of the decade and beyond. The unexpected fact, the Mulsanne Turbo's chassis and suspension were carried over almost unchanged from the standard Silver Spirit, tuned for comfort rather than pace, meaning Bentley's most powerful engine in a generation was bolted into a car not fully engineered to handle it. Journalists at the time noted that the car's straight-line performance could outrun its cornering composure, and it would take Bentley several more years and several more revisions before the chassis genuinely matched what the engine could do. The power arrived first. The chassis caught up several years later. Even with that early mismatch, the Mulsanne Turbo is now widely regarded as the car that saved Bentley as a meaningful brand. Before 1982, Bentley sales had shrunk to a small fraction of Rolls-Royce's, and there was genuine internal discussion about whether the marque was worth continuing at all. The Turbo reversed that trend so completely that by the end of the decade Bentley's sales had grown many times over, eventually outselling Rolls-Royce itself under the same roof, a turnaround that began with one turbocharger bolted to an engine everyone thought they already understood. Number 2. DeLorean DMC-12, 1981. Built in Belfast, financed by government money, remembered for a film it never intended to be in. The DMC-12 launched in 1981 from DeLorean Motor Company's factory in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland, a gull-winged two-seater with a stainless steel body over a fiberglass understructure, powered by a Peugeot Volvo 2.8-liter V6 producing 130 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 109 miles per hour, notably modest for a car with such dramatic styling. The factory itself was a product of British government job creation funding for Northern Ireland, and the car's gull-wing doors and unpainted steel panels made it visually unlike anything else on sale. John DeLorean, a former General Motors executive, had pitched the project as a way to bring high-value manufacturing jobs to a region badly affected by unemployment and sectarian violence, and the British government backed it with tens of millions of pounds in loans and grants, hoping for both economic and political dividends. The unexpected fact, the DMC-12's performance was widely criticized as disappointing relative to its exotic appearance, with contemporary road testers noting it was slower than family saloons costing a fraction of the price, before the company collapsed into receivership within roughly 18 months of full production starting. John DeLorean's arrest on drug trafficking charges in late 1982, in an incident he always maintained was an entrapment operation, effectively finished off any hope of the company's survival, though he was later acquitted. Around 9,000 cars were built in total before the factory closed for good. A car remembered today mainly for a role it was never designed to play. Strip away the film association entirely, and the DMC-12 is a genuinely strange chapter in British industrial policy. A car built with public money, in a region chosen for political reasons as much as economic ones, using an unpainted body material nobody else in the industry was working with at scale. Quality control issues on the production line were well documented at the time, with panel fit and electrical reliability both drawing criticism from early reviewers. And yet the styling, penned by Giorgetto Giugiaro, has aged into something closer to iconic than any of its contemporaries. Proof that a car can fail commercially and still end up permanently lodged in popular culture. Number 1. Panther Solo 2, 1989. The most technically promising British sports car of the decade, and the one that never really got the chance to prove it. The Panther Solo 2 launched in 1989 from Panther Westwines under new Korean ownership, SsangYong, a mid-engined, four-wheel drive sports car built on a bonded aluminum and composite chassis, powered by a turbocharged Ford Sierra Cosworth 2.0-liter engine producing 204 brake horsepower. Road tests recorded a top speed of around 145 miles per hour. The Solo 2's construction was genuinely advanced for a low-volume British sports car, using aerospace-influenced bonding techniques and four-wheel drive years before such technology became common outside rally homologation specials. The project had actually begun life under different ownership as a simpler, rear-wheel drive Solo 1 concept, before Panther's Korean owners pushed for a far more ambitious four-wheel drive re-engineering that delayed the car's launch by years and inflated its development costs well beyond what a company of Panther's size could comfortably absorb. The unexpected fact, despite performance that matched or beat contemporary rivals in testing, corporate turmoil following Panther's change of ownership meant fewer than 25 examples were ever built, and independent journalists who drove it consistently noted it was quicker than reviewers were initially permitted to publish. Some road testers at the time suggested the factory was almost embarrassed by how capable the car was relative to its tiny production run and uncertain future, since praising it too highly only underlined how few people would ever actually get to buy one. The engineering was ready. The company behind it never was. What makes the Solo 2 story sting a little more than most on this list is how forward-looking the engineering genuinely was. Bonded aluminum construction wouldn't become common in mainstream sports cars for another decade, and permanent four-wheel drive in a lightweight two-seater was still largely confined to homologation specials built for rallying. Panther Westwines folded not long after the Solo 2's launch, and the handful of surviving examples are now among the rarest and most sought-after British sports cars of the entire decade, a car whose reputation, ironically, has only grown the longer it's been out of production. The 1980s asked British luxury carmakers to compete on technology, refinement, and performance all at once, often with budgets, timelines, and supply chains that hadn't caught up with their own ambitions. In several cases here, the ideas were genuinely ahead of their era. The execution simply wasn't. Look across this list, and a pattern starts to repeat itself. Rolls-Royce solved a climate problem nobody needed solved while its styling divided opinion. Daimler kept a royal name alive on a Jaguar chassis. TVR dressed Ford parts in origami bodywork. Rover built a genuinely modern car on a production line too troubled to finish it properly. Jaguar fixed the V12's thirst just enough to keep the car alive, without ever truly fixing it. Aston Martin sold the future before the electronics could deliver it. Reliant built the right engine for the wrong moment. Bentley found its power before its chassis caught up. DeLorean built a factory around politics as much as around cars, and a shape that outlived the company. And Panther built, arguably, the most complete package of the whole decade, and almost nobody ever got to drive one. That's the story of British luxury and performance cars in the 1980s. Extraordinary ideas, chronically under-resourced, arriving in a decade that rewarded confidence more than it rewarded follow-through. Some of these cars have since been reappraised by collectors and historians who see the ambition more clearly with 40 years of distance. Others remain cautionary tales about what happens when a small company reaches further than its budget allows. Which of these surprised you most? And did the Lagonda's dashboard deserve its reputation, or was it just too early for the technology it was built on? Drop your pick in the comments. I read every one. If you enjoyed this countdown, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. And if you want to go deeper on any car from this list, let me know which one and it might be next week's full episode.